So good day, everyone. I am Arizza Nocum from the Philippines, one of the extremely together young leaders under the Kofi Annan Foundation. I'm so happy to welcome everyone here today from different countries and different time zones, and I do hope that everyone is doing well amid the pandemic. So when we look around us today, when we watch the news, when we go online, one of the first things, sadly, that we notice is that COVID-19 has created what has been called the perfect storm for violent extremism worldwide. The pandemic has caused so much uncertainty and so much fear, and this uncertainty and fear is easily exploited by violent extremists. The pandemic has caused economic uncertainty for millions of people, and for these millions, especially the young, they're becoming more vulnerable to violent extremism by simply having no job, not being able to go to school, and experiencing the other economic effects of COVID-19. The pandemic has also become the rallying point that has caused further discrimination and marginalization, especially for minorities and migrants. The pandemic has changed the landscape of violent extremism worldwide, and violent extremists are adapting. So should we, those who are preventing and countering violent extremism. So these extremely together digital discussions have been created in order for us to adapt and to act. Throughout 4 sessions, we'll be discussing how COVID-19 is affecting violent extremism, how it is affecting the youth, what we can do, where we need support, and how we can stay extremely together. So today, we'll be focusing particularly on understanding the context. How is COVID-19 affecting violent extremism? How is it changing the landscape? How are young people affected in different parts of the world? And I'm so happy today that these speakers will be joining us to answer these questions. So I'm happy to welcome Mr. Elhadj, the president of the board of the Kofi Annan Foundation and the current WHO and World Bank co-chair of the Global Preparedness Monitoring Board. I'm also happy to welcome Ms. Petrider, a defender of women's and girls' rights in Africa and one of the members of the African Union Youth Advisory Council. And I'm also happy to welcome one of my colleagues from Extremely Together, Bjorn Ihler from Norway. So before we start with our speakers, please watch this video where you can learn more about what exactly Extremely Together is.
Thanks for watching the video and thanks for joining us. Extreme Together was founded in 2016 by Kofi Annan, who always said that young people should be at the forefront of global change and innovation. Empowered, we can be key agents for development and peace, and if youth are left on the outside, all of us will be impoverished. That's what he said, and something that I deeply agree with. He wanted youth to be engaged in countering and preventing violent extremism, as he saw that as fundamental to the future of our human societies. And since 2016, we have been working towards that. Of course, with the global pandemic of COVID-19, the global landscape has changed. It's essentially the first truly global event. It's something that has impacted people all over the planet and something that has changed fundamentally the way in which our societies are working. In some ways, it has perhaps created stronger ties between nations and between people from across the world as we are all going through this together, but at the same time, it has also become a breeding ground for conspiracy theories. There has been an uptick in hateful content, both online and offline. It's been something that has essentially fueled the fire of certain groups internationally. And so we saw that there was a need to look at COVID-19 from the perspective of people fighting against violent extremism, and particularly from the perspective of youth fighting against violent extremism. COVID-19 has perhaps enhanced the differences between people as well in new ways, and the differences between the societies in which we live in. The difference in access to healthcare and access to information. And so it's essential that we are working in ways to maintain peace and to work together to challenge those who are seeing this as an opportunity to spread hatred, to try to split our societies, and to build their violent movements. And so we have created these youth dialogues, bringing together experts from all over the world, trying to highlight some voices, and wishing to have everyone who is participating in the chats and in the Q&As, both on the Facebook live stream and then on the Blue Jeans stream and elsewhere. We really want you to participate in the dialogue by posting your questions, adding them to those for us. And we also want to continue the conversation between these meetings. We will have meetings every 2 weeks with different experts and different high-level personnel. And so we will take these opportunities to learn from them, but also these opportunities to convey messages to key people. The output of these dialogues will be a policy document, something we will design and draft together, and something that we will distribute and have a process, a due process, an open process in which everyone is invited to participate. And we will take feedback on that policy note and bring that to the United Nations General Assembly and present it at an event there. And so this is really a process to try to include youth in determining the future for how we will continue the struggle against violent extremism and how we will continue that fight in light of COVID-19 and how COVID-19 has been a challenge and also provided opportunities for us to do work in new and exciting ways. And so now it's my privilege to give the floor to the new president of the Kofi Annan Foundation, Elhadj LC.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Bjorn. Thank you, Arizza, and thank you, Petrider. So it's a great, privilege and pride, honestly, to join you. You're the young leaders of Extremely Together. Normally, I should have just been here and actively and very actively listening to you, to your perspective, so that we also learn, from you, because you bring a unique perspective that is not always, heard most, and that is not always taken into account in the design and implementation of the programs, that are trying to respond to the challenges of our time. This space is yours, and we are a humble guest, here, and the most of the time that we will devote will be to actively listen to you. But because we are facing together an unprecedented shock and hazard, that is forces us all to be humble. It forces us humility because there is no precedent that we can learn from to see how we can handle this particular situation. It is not a one-sector issue. It is a multi-sectoral, multi-dimensional issue that is also calling for a multi-dimensional response. And it reveals many of the dysfunctionalities that we see in our societies and in our systems. It reveals the best in humanity next to the worst in humanity. The worst because we see in this very time exclusion, we see discrimination, we see hatred, we see lack of solidarity, we see great competition to access information, competition to access resources, competition to access, the scarce commodities, that should prevent, the infection and then the further transmission of COVID-19. We see a fallback into nationalism and populism at a time when what we needed most is, solidarity. We see also all the negative forces, that are trying to take advantage of the situation and then taking the crisis as an alibi not to do the right thing, taking it as an alibi not to enforce democratic principles, taking it as an alibi to postpone or even cancel elections, taking it as an alibi to use methods that are authoritarian methods, that are against, the liberty and the freedom, of speech, as well as the freedoms of expression of political will in many different ways. But next to the worst, we have the best. We have those who are disproportionately affected, and among them young people. Because indeed, when schools are closed, the young people are more affected than anybody else. If the economy is shutting down, those who are looking for their first opportunity to get a job are affected. If, of course, the social distancing and social gathering is cut, young people also are badly affected. But if you look at the infection in itself, it is not affecting, from a clinical point of view, the young people. But all the other aspects of it are disproportionately affecting young people indeed. Well, they can choose to be passive victims or be part of the problems that I described, or they can choose to be part of the solution. And in many ways, you have chosen to be part of the solution. To promote solidarity where nationalism is a norm and competition, to promote care, support, where discrimination and exclusion is a norm, to create spaces, safe spaces for dialogue, like the ones we are having now today, to share ideas, have, quote unquote, a battle of ideas, to learn from each other and then to chart a way forward, that can be more constructive, more engaging. At the times, where, the voices, the negative voices are very loud through fake news and other means, to be there and then be there all the time, to stand for the principles and then to stand for the values that are of peace, that are of reconciliation, that are of healing. The world today needs a lot of healing. We should not only heal COVID as an infection, but we also should heal the relationships among people. We heal the relationship among this generation and the next one. Heal the relationship between the young and old, between the men and women, between the poor and the rich. And most importantly, to bring together the formal structures of governance and the informal ones. Because in times like this, people will cry for health, they will cry for food, they cry for water. But among all, they will cry for normalcy. And what we are living now today is not normal. And that cry for normalcy will find its best expression in the establishment of peace, so that, people can have the safety, to strive and not only survive, but then to strive, to preserve what is most important to them and to all of us, which is our human dignity. There is a time of shared humanity, and I'm very, very proud, to see you leading on that, and very proud to see this happening under the auspices of Kofi Annan Foundation and the spirit of our founder, and look forward to actively listening from you and learning from you. Thank you very much. Over.
Thank you so much, Mr. Sai. It's now my honor and privilege to introduce Ms. Preparedness, who is a member of the African Youth Union's Youth Envoys Youth Advisory Council. She's also a renowned girls' and women's rights defender and an influencer for promotion of children's rights. She has, among many things, been awarded the Point of Light Award from the Majesty Her Queen of the United Kingdom in 2018, for her work to campaign to end child marriage and gender-based violence in the Commonwealth, and as an East African Community Youth Ambassador. So, Ms. Paul, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Actually, first of all, I would like to extend my gratitude to the Kofi Annan Foundation for spearheading this agenda, especially through Extremely Together. The African Union Youth Envoys Office is a proud supporter of peace-building initiative and the AU itself, and this collaboration actually shows us how much we can do if we work together to bring about change when it comes to peace and security issues, especially the issues that are affecting young people. Just to kickstart, I'm just going to share some few highlights of the different interventions and work we've done, especially from different categories. We've really worked from the African Union Youth Envoys Office level. We've really worked much on promoting peace and security through championing for the African Union theme of the year, which is silencing the guns, creating a conducive environment for development in Africa. And this is not only just because it's the theme of the year for 2020. Efforts have been ongoing since last year when we're looking for best alternatives and initiatives to help refugees who are in forced displacement. Ideally, our work focuses also on finding better solutions on how children, girls, and women who are mostly affected in conflict can receive different support systems, mediation strategies that are already in place through the key institutions within the AU, but however, we are trickling it down to advocacy initiatives on the ground. So currently, we've been working to promote different youth engagement activities in Africa and in the diaspora, especially our key moment where we engaged in a joint mission with the government of South Sudan to call on young people and also women, especially to be the spearheaders of peace and security within the government of South Sudan. And we managed to launch an initiative which was led by a local South Sudanese. That was books and not bullets, because currently young people, not only in South Sudan, but different corners of Africa, are facing a lot of insecurity and conflict issues, either caused by elections, either caused by lack of proper governance system that is in place. And especially during this time of COVID-19, we've seen a lot of outbreak of violences that is occurring silently within countries in Africa that is not properly documented. So how can young people lead the process to cease fire and call on governments to actually take initiatives of maintaining peace and security within the continent? However, we've been really engaging different young people right now within the COVID-19 limitation space of delivering activities offline. We've been working online through a series of consultations that we've managed to launch the African Youth Front on COVID-19 and Her Excellency Amira El Fadil, who's the Commissioner of Social Affairs from the African Union Commission. Actually, the African Union Youth Front on COVID-19 gathers different young people from young parliamentarians, National Youth Council, regional blocks, all the 5 regions of Africa, and young people from diaspora, including women-led networks and young people with disabilities, to actually see how best we can support youth at this stage of COVID-19 within their work and within their different initiatives that are in line with maintaining peace and security, whereby through the various consultations we are still engaging various young people through our partner network to provide support on the ground on how to document their work, but also even in terms of seed grant. Currently, we are supporting different young women who are tackling gender-based violence within their region or within their countries through their story submissions on how best that they're working on different initiatives of gender-based violence, because as we know, peace and security does not only mean the use of firearms, it also means the whole situation of gender-based violence that comes out of conflict situation. And peace and lack of peace and security actually also means disruptions on climate change, disruptions on issues of health, health access availability. So how best can we ensure young people are at the forefront to access such needs in situations of conflict? It's what we are really working on. And through an initiative that we have currently on the pipeline is to provide mechanism of support to young people through a mental health a program that should be able to cater for the young people who are currently facing situations that they cannot report, how best they can find different safe platforms to report the issues of either violence or insecurities that they are facing within their countries. But majority is to just share that we have really focused on working with different young people from different sectors and different institutions, not only in Africa. We've also worked with young people within the UN agencies. The UN Youth Envoy herself is a proud partner of our work that we are doing to promote peace and security. And as we started off earlier, it's time for young people to act, and we should not really remain silent when it comes to issues of conflict within our countries. Even if a young person comes from a peaceful country, I think that the initiatives of coming together and voicing out for each other, it's what really matters the most, especially during this time of COVID-19, where cases could be silenced and a lot of attention is centered outside of different initiatives, especially when if you're looking at peace and security or health matters per se, because we are really looking more on tackling the virus and even leaving out other health issues that are happening within the continent. So my call to young people, especially who joined in the call today, is to take initiative and collaborate more on acting towards championing for peace and stability within countries. And this should not even be something that can use much resources. It's a matter of collaborating online at the current moment, or even strategizing for the future ahead, because young people are the leaders of today, and in fact they have proven to be doing a really, really great work. If you look at the Extremely Together leadership itself, it's composed of young people, and these are live examples on how young people are taking lead to drive change. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Petrider. It was really a pleasure hearing from you. And next, we'll have my colleague Bjorn, who is an Extremely Together young leader.
Thank you so much, Arizza. I think for sure that both Ms. Paul and Mr. Sai are correct in their assessments of the situations. We are dealing with this differently in different parts of the world, and the experience, while being global and unifying in some ways, is also exploitable and being exploited by those who thrive on fear. I commonly say that violent extremism is the violent denial of diversity, and ultimately that is true for all violent extremist groups, whether they're far-right extremists or Islamist extremists or whichever violent extremist group they are part of. They can't handle the fact that people are different within a society, and this is further amplified in a community when the community is influenced by fear. Extremists thrive on essentially spreading fear between people, and when there is fear in a society of something like a disease, something like COVID-19, that is something that makes us as human beings go back to kind of our core instincts, and often that is something that can be exploited by those who wish to spread hateful propaganda and hateful content. As early as in mid-April, we saw that there was a drastic increase in content online being spread by far-right extremist groups. A survey from the US shows that there was a 13% increase in engagement with white supremacist content on Google by the 14th of April. That was about a month after the global shutdowns had started. We've also seen a massive uptick in hatred against people of Southeast Asian origin across large parts of Western countries. I have personally heard horrific stories from friends who are of Korean origin living in the Netherlands, who have experienced being attacked while out on their bicycles. And so the kind of skepticism that leads to fear, that leads to hatred, that leads to violence is certainly something that has been amplified and accelerated by the virus and by the fear that the virus has brought into our societies. At the same time, our governments have reacted in vastly different ways. Here in Sweden, the crackdown has not been that severe, but in neighboring countries, the countries have slipped into something that looks closer to authoritarianism. There's been emergency legislation that has essentially bypassed parliaments and overruled constitutions in some of the constitutional democracies that we had strong faith in. And it's been devastating to see that, and see that as a starting point of a slippery slope into authoritarianism. That has also, the virus has obviously also had a massive impact on the economy, and a lot of people have lost their livelihoods, and that further escalates these kind of underlying root causes of violent extremism that we see that are universal all over the planet, really. And that again has amplified some of this hateful content that's now must also be seen in light of what has been going on in the US for the last week, where police brutality has led to massive protests, and the Black Lives Matter movement is standing up for the right of Black people in the States to live and walk down the streets without fear of the police. And so I think it's important to see those things in context of each other, but also see that we are living in a particularly tense period where a lot of things are on the verge or balancing between going terribly, terribly wrong and going the way we would like towards a more united world, a world in which we can live together in diverse communities, celebrate that diversity, and appreciate it as something that makes us stronger as a human society globally. And so I think these conversations is really a great opportunity to collect our voices, collect our minds, and work together for that future. And so that is kind of my sentiments surrounding this, and I'm happy now to pass the chair on to Arizza.
Okay, thank you, Bjorn, and thank you so much for sharing all those really helpful insights into our current situation. In the Philippines, to be honest, the picture I'm going to paint is not rosy. So I'll briefly introduce myself. I'm Arizza, and that promotes peace through education. And aside from that, of course, I'm proud to be one of the 10 extremely together young leaders under the Kofi Annan Foundation. So here in the Philippines, the COVID-19 situation has definitely had a profound impact on violent extremism and the young people. In recent months, as we are struggling under this pandemic, we've had several clashes between the Philippine Armed Forces and fighters from a group called Abu Sayyaf. Abu Sayyaf is a violent extremist group that has ties established with ISIS or the Islamic State. And unfortunately, the fear now is that they are creating a more unified and stronger front in Southeast Asia. Aside from the clashes that have been happening, there's also been a threat of ships in the Philippines and traversing nearby Malaysia being threatened by kidnapping for ransom by this same group, the Abu Sayyaf. So it's not clear whether these actions are being perpetrated because Abu Sayyaf knows that the Philippine armed forces are running thin because of their response to the COVID-19 pandemic. It may also be that they're trying to amass resources for their recruited members or their current base because they come from one of the poorest regions in the Philippines. But what I do feel is that in many of these regions, young people are definitely becoming more vulnerable to these groups, and the fact that they are somehow and possibly becoming more unified and stronger is a big threat to the security of not just those communities, but our country. And since the movement of Abu Sayyaf here has always been tied to the movement of ISIS in Southeast Asia, it also poses a threat to the whole region. So this is the first thing I'd like to share. The second thing is on the side of the government. So just these past days, our government is very close to signing off something called the Anti-Terrorism Law, which has been the target of criticism from both Filipinos and even the United Nations human rights body. I'd like to share something in a report that was released just a few hours ago by the UN Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. It stated that the proposed 2020 Anti-Terrorism Act of the Philippines dilutes human rights safeguards, broadens the definition of terrorism, and expands the period of detention without warrant. In plainer words, as one local congressman said, this law is not meant to combat terrorism. It is meant to give the state power to tag whomever they please as a terrorist. Here, it is also not clear why there is urgency in having a law like this approved right now, when the priority of the government should clearly be continuing to mitigate the impact of COVID-19. Citizens speculate that possibly, as people criticize the government's action and clamor for more effective responses to the pandemic, this is one way to silence that criticism. The third and last thing I'd like to share is that throughout this impact on violent extremism, this anti-terrorism law, young people are particularly vulnerable. Nationwide, young Filipinos have stayed at home since March, unsure of when classes will resume. Typically, June is the beginning of the school year here in the Philippines, but that may be shifted to September or much later. And faced with the possibility of an education that is not just physical, but also digital, millions of students here will find themselves on the losing end of the bargain because many Filipino students still don't have access to internet connection, to a good digital device, or even in the most far-flung places, to a telephone signal or a mobile signal. These developments are seen to widen the gap of inequality and make the future less certain for millions of young people. And as I've mentioned earlier, in areas in which groups like the Abu Sayyaf is active, the impact of COVID-19 is that it may just be much easier to exploit the uncertainties and fears that young people have so that they join these groups. These 3 points to me paint a very sad picture of how COVID-19 is further enabling violent extremism and how, unfortunately, based on recent developments, the government may not be able to truly address and may even heighten the many root causes in the environment that are furthering the vulnerability of people, especially the young, to violent extremism. So to end this, I just want to say that the onus is on us, young people, our organizations, our civil society groups, and other youth leaders. We need to continue to wage war against violent extremism. If COVID-19 has, as they said, created the perfect storm for violent extremists, then we're going to have to do what we can to provide shelter, especially to fellow young people. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Arizza. We are now going to open the floor to everyone else through a Q&A. I encourage everyone to keep participating in the chat. We have already received more questions than we'll probably be able to answer in the next 20 minutes, which is fantastic. I love that. Some of the questions are following similar themes that we will try to pick out and bundle together some of the questions into thematic bundles. But we'll also keep the conversation going on social media after this conversation and between the conversations. And also we will, to the best of my knowledge at least, be collecting all of the questions and all of the input that we're getting through the chats to have that as background for the input into the policy note and the final products of these conversations. So the first theme that is sticking out to me among the questions that I've been receiving so far, really about youth and first of all, how a lot of youth are now finding themselves unemployed as a result of the current situation. That is causing a lot of economic devastation, which in turn is creating a space for violent extremists to recruit youth who are essentially fed up with the way in which their lives are going. And as we've seen for decades now, this can be a significant root cause in radicalization and in recruitment. And so the question is really what we can do to tackle this. Why don't we kick off by sending this question to Elhadj LSC? Essentially, how we can address the issue of how the economic impact is impacting youth and might lead to radicalization. It's a complex question, but it's the one.
Yes, but it's a very important, because in the absence of opportunities, people become more vulnerable, and that vulnerability exposes one, to, all kinds of manipulation, even potential recruitment or involvement in other activities, and one may embark into those just as a strategy for survival, and not necessarily, as a true commitment or belief into that. So we need definitely two things. One is, a kind of an inclusive, type of economic restart and reset that will be giving, opportunity to young people. And that is not enough. We need also to have the social safety nets that will be accompanying that, so that, those who will not in the first instance, and it will be difficult to have everybody in the first instance, accessing those opportunities, will not left behind. They will get, the support, they need, in terms of support for continuous studies, support, in terms of apprenticeship, support in participation in other activities, that, can serve society at the same time, give an opportunity, for young people. And there, in all the contexts, even in the poorest of the poor countries, those opportunities do exist. And when I was reading, on the bar here, some of the initiatives that young people were getting engaged in, even in this time, the difficult times, it shows that one can always be part of the solution, in that sense. But again, we need vigilance, more than ever before, create opportunities that are more inclusive, pay attention to the social safety net so that we do not provide a fertile ground for all the recruiters upon those who are manipulating and enrolling young people, into paths that are the ones that we would like, to resist. Over.
Thank you so much. Petrider?
Ideally, from my side, thank you, Mr. Elhadj, for pointing that out. From my side, I'll just share that actually it is quite really true that currently, with the current situation, a lot of young people are affected with unemployment. And this brings young people to be a target, and especially when they are targets in countries where they can easily be recruited. Even in countries where there's a lack of conflict, actually young people can be recruited, because I think we have a recent scenario of a couple of years back when the Al-Shabaab attacks in Kenya. One of the actual groups of the members of the groups were a young person from Tanzania. So you find that young people are a target, especially during this time, and when they do not have employment. But I think it's more on how best we can raise awareness and find better opportunities for young people to engage. In order to be able to still generate a source of income, whether it's through online working or providing opportunities of short-time placement. I think we have a lot of platforms that still are offering opportunities for young people to volunteer, even online paid volunteering programs that young people can engage on. And I totally agree with Mr. Elhadj on the fact of apprenticeships programs that actually do help young people and can be accessible. But more on is the fact that we need to raise awareness on how young people who are unemployed also can engage themselves proactively during this time of COVID-19. And it's not only up to us, it's also up to everyone who's tuned in for this session and everyone who's listening to also take that initiative further, working with their fellow partners within their institutions, but also with different groups or networks that they know of. Coming up with creative solution is quite important during this time to be able to elevate young people to progress further.
Let me get another question from the audience. So this is for Mr. Elhadj and Ms. Petrider. One question that I find interesting is from Akwasi Sarpong from Ghana. How can we leverage on our culture in African communities to prevent violent extremism, especially with regards to youth-led organizations? And I think if we expand that, how do we also, even those who are not from the African region, leverage on grassroots movements and values to prevent violent extremism?
All right, just to tap onto that, how can we actually leverage different initiatives or different cultures to prevent violent extremism from grassroots level, and also including different young people or stakeholders who are not only in Africa but outside Africa? I would say it's more on looking at what opportunities are there in place. There are a lot of platforms that are advocating for peace-related initiatives, and I think for actually, the person who shared this great question tuned into Extremely Together, the digital discussion means it's an opportunity for them to look at how best to capture the moments of different interventions that are also done within the Extremely Together platform, and engage and converse online or offline once actually we return to the normal realities of life. But leading the new normal currently, I think it's more important, especially when we are looking at from the African Union level per se. I would say in Africa we are having the current ongoing campaign of silencing the guns by 2020, whereby we are looking at an all-Africa ceasefire, and it's not only an all-Africa-led initiative. Actually, even His Excellency Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General of the United Nations, is in support of the initiative, and we are working with different institutions within the diaspora networks and outside of Africa to implement. So I think it's just more to tune into what opportunities are there within different platforms to engage. And even if when we start the ongoing virtual sessions, we're going to have some virtual summits for young people, especially to silence the guns, that are going to start mid-June towards September 2020. So these are also avenues of engagement and find better interventions on how best a person individually or in a group can collaborate with others so that they can be able to either engage directly within the summits or post the summits. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Petrider. Mr. Elhadj, do you want to take this on?
Oh, that is a wonderful question, and thank you very much, for posing that. Now, in African culture or any other culture, there are two basic, principles, that are being taught from early age, and those are around self-esteem on the one hand, and the respect for the other on the other. Self-esteem with the respect has a name, it is arrogance, and we don't want that. So you have to have the values, to respect yourself, to care for yourself, to advance yourself, to strive for excellence, to be assertive, to be good, in your own skin and in your own feet. At the same time, be humble without being weak, to respect, other people. And that's why we greet each other. That's why we show difference, to each other. And in most of the cultures, how do you greet with each other? Peace. Salam alaikum. Shalom. Peace upon you. Friede sei mit dir. Every language, that you have put it, it is the kind of a way you find it. So to go back, to those and then find those norms and values, that are promoting, peace and reconciliation and getting together, are the basis of most of the cultures. And I think if we, put values on them, we have a fertile ground, to grow up on. I'm very happy that you are posing this question because, culture is being accused for so many things, for harmful practices, or an alibi, not to change. But we often do not go to those norms and values. And those are the very powerful ones, that are making people that we are social beings, and the social beings we are can only prosper, in an environment that is stable and that is peaceful. And that is the reason why you find, the short word that is a greeting word, in each of the cultures and in the languages, and I just quoted, some of them. And finally, if you talk about African culture, of course, you cannot finish without mentioning the Ubuntu. Ubuntu, which is a purely African tradition and culture. My being is only meaningful according to yours. And that is, in that spirit, also that in many other cultures, don't do to the others what you don't want, to be done to yourself. And it is said in cultures and religion, but in the ground roots, of, Ubuntu is really that. And I think sometimes we tell, ourselves and then young people, that there will be times maybe we are lost and we don't know where we're going. And then it is that time important that we'll go a little bit back where we're from. And it is in those norms and values that we will draw that strength, of peace and cohesion, that will be holding us together.
Thank you so much for that answer, Mr. Elhadj, and for Ms. Petrider for your answer earlier. I'm sure all of us here who are from Africa and not from the region are really thrilled to hear those results. Bjorn, another question?
Yeah, I think kind of on Elhadj's note of Ubuntu, one of the most inspirational practices or ways in which that has been executed is through the both truth and reconciliation process after the fall of apartheid, as well as in the process of writing the Freedom Charter in the 1950s, where there were consultations from the African National Congress, and they traveled around to people's kitchens and collected inputs for this document that became so fundamental to eliminating apartheid, and as part of the inspiration for this series of conversations. Part of that was also amplifying the voices of the people and bringing them to the people in power. And another kind of thematic question here is how we can amplify the voices of youth. How can youth get into a position of being heard by the people in power, the people in the parliaments, and the people in the transnational organizations? Elhadj, why don't you kick this one off?
I think that it all starts, with the notion of citizenship. There is no meaningful notion of citizenship that will be leaving behind or excluding, any important segment of society. And then youth is a very important segment of society. So if I look at the African continent, up to 70%, 70% of the population is aged between 0 to 35 years old. I mean, that is extreme. You will not develop, you will not have cohesion, you will not have good citizenship, you will not have good governance, unless you have a meaningful involvement and participation of that very important segment. So it is, first of all, an exercise of citizenship. It is not a favor, to young people. It is not a favor to youth. It is, in the contrary, a benefit, for society, to get that. But citizenship has to be fought for. It has to be, exercised in many ways. And that is a responsibility of everybody. So young people should take their citizen rights, very seriously, and then fight for those rights and then stand up. And I think they're doing that, very well. And then everybody should see in that also their own interest. Because I think it is in the interest of also the older generation, to do so. It is in the interest of the, good institutions, to allow that, to happen. And that's the reason why we need, some continuous partnerships between the different age groups is really important. So we can learn from each other, we can support each other. Within those groups, we need also partnerships, between men and women. The gender dimension is extremely important. Within that, we need also partnership between the poor, and the rich. So that all contribute to, the one inclusive, movement of citizenship that we all have to carry. And that is part of good governance, that is part of good political leadership, and that is part of also creating an enabling environment for peace.
Thank you so much. Is Petrider still with us? There you are. Do you want to address the question?
All right. Okay, thank you. I was just muted. Just to touch on that a bit, I think from my side, and I think what we've also been promoting is core intergenerational leadership. I think this is very, very critical. What young people are learning from the older generation and co-leading change, so as to be able to bring about change within the landscape that they're not actually seeing it being delivered effectively, and how could they provide guidance and see what are the hurdles that they can be able to actually contribute to achieving a better and bigger success. But also I wanted also to share on that there is an opportunity for young people actually to also vie for parliamentary positions and actually be the leaders themselves and be the change they want to see. We should try and limit more on pointing fingers actually to situations that we might not ourselves be able to understand or be aware of what actually are the details within that particular position that is enabling the leader to behave in a certain manner or not act appropriately. So I think if young people also can be daring enough to take up those leadership position and vie for the position, but also what mostly is important is engage more in core intergenerational leadership with our current leaders, so as they can be able to be mentored in that landscape and be able to influence change to bring about the change we all want to see. And I think this is very, very critical at the current era that we are in, especially with the phase out of different leaders in government position. If we do not walk in their steps and learn from what they're doing and try to either improve it better or try to see what are the bureaucracies that are in place, we might not really be able to solve the solution. We might end up having also a diverse number of young people who are going to take up the different position and still maintain that normalcy of hurdles and barriers that contribute to development. So I think it's all about core intergenerational leadership, and young people be daring enough to vie for those parliamentary positions that they see either not being delivered effectively, or try to see how best they can be able to contribute to change. Because I do believe that governments do listen, and actually positions are there for you to be daring enough to take up and actually vie for them. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Paul. We are nearing the end of this. Arizza, take it away.
All right, so unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today. So thank you so much, Mr. Elhadj. Thank you, Ms. Petrider. Thank you, Bjorn. But before you all leave, I'd like to share that this has been such a wonderful discussion. And the best thing about it is that it's only the beginning. So as Bjorn mentioned earlier, this is not the end. This is the first of 4 sessions. And I'd like to invite all of you participating to the second session, which is happening on June 18 at the same time. And there we'll be talking about the effect of the pandemic on youth-led initiatives to prevent violent extremism. The third session is on July 2nd, which is about developing youth-led solutions to preventing violent extremism amid the pandemic. And then finally, the fourth session, which is happening on July 16th, is about demanding of our leaders and other stakeholders the reforms we need to truly promote peace and to truly be extremely together. So we hope that you'll be able to join us in these future sessions. And Bjorn, would you want to share how else our participants can contribute in our actions moving forward?
Yes, Extremely Together is very active on social media. The best way to continue the conversations and continue asking questions and continue providing input is both through our Facebook or Twitter and or Instagram, also by using the hashtag #ETDigitalDiscussions, and also by contributing through the form we have been distributing as far and wide as we could, in order to collect input from as many young people around the world as possible. We appreciate all of it. I'm sorry we didn't get to all of the questions today. We have had an immense amount of questions coming in, and it's really exciting to see this level of engagement. And we will keep the volume up also between the meetings that Arizza just listed. So thank you all for all of the people who have been listening and watching on the different streams. And thank you also so much to Elhadj and to Petrider and to you, Arizza, for your time and for taking part in this first session of the Extremely Together Digital Dialogues.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. It's been a wonderful session.
Thank you, everyone, again. And we'll wave ourselves goodbye now. Please stay safe and healthy, hopefully, under these circumstances.
Thanks.